Welcome everybody. If you're excited for this video, give it a like because it's the top 64 decks from Disney Lorcana Fort Worth. The tournament's finished. It was Ruby Amethyst which came out on top, but we're going to look at all of the most interesting lists as well as all the lists which won those golden Mickeys. Jan is joining me, who's a very good player from Germany and has the Podcarna podcast, which you should definitely go check out. Jan, you've not seen these decks yet, have you? So it's your first impression.
I was forbidden, so it's my first time impressions now.
Yeah. All right. We're starting off with the tournament winner, Ruby Amethyst, but it's going to catch you off guard, Jan, because look at this. No copies of Bee King Undisputed in this deck. Now, there's 2 copies of Sisu Empowered Sibling. Can I just mention, Jan, I did say to you I was thinking about playing this card in my Ruby Amethyst deck.
Yes, but you also love Bee King and you would have never cut it.
That's true. That is actually very true. Also, I'm going to point out the 4 copies of Magic Brooms while also playing 4 copies of Maleficent Sorceress. So, very interesting. As Jan knows and many of my viewers will know, I'm a big fan of the Magic Brooms. I have slated the Maleficent Sorceress, but honestly, I've got a lot more time for it in the deck if you are playing the Brooms. I would never play Maleficent without the Brooms, but if the Brooms are in there and Edmund still wanted the card draw, and Edmund in their interview talked about their build a little bit, and they mentioned that cards like Bee King Undisputed are particularly powerful against Sapphire decks, and they didn't feel it necessary to hedge their bets against the Sapphire decks, but instead wanted to be a little bit more greedy and solidify the matchup against Emerald Steel in particular, but also they felt like this build would help their matchup into Ruby Amethyst mirrors. And I can certainly see why with this 8-cost Sisu. It's shift 6, of course. So if you've got the Emboldened, the smaller one on the board, the Emboldened Warrior, on turn 6, you can shift in that Sisu to clear Buckies. But also, of course, against the Emerald Steel decks, they can discard Be Prepared, but they can't discard the Sisu unless they whittle your hand down all the way. Edmund was the 2nd seed, Jan, in Swiss, and then still won the tournament. So that is a very impressive run.
Being 2nd seed does help for winning the tournament.
That's true. But believe it or not, Jan, they actually went 2nd twice in the final because the final was 1st versus 2nd seed, but the 2nd seed was victorious in the final.
That is very, very cool.
Yeah. What do you think about this deck?
I like the build. It's like, I think it's like hyper consistent early game. It plays very little uninkables because it only plays 2. It only plays 2 Medusas, and instead of something like a 3 Bee King Undisputed, it's only on the 2 Sisu. The Bee Kings can be very lackluster in the Mirror and Emerald Steel, so for those matchups, I think this deck is hedging very, very well. I don't think this. I do think this deck will lose quite a few percentages against Sapphire, but I think Sapphire players are a little less common than they used to be, and also they're often kind of bad, and maybe then you can get away with it.
Interesting. So I mean, that's a hot take, but there's obviously a significantly less Ruby Sapphire in the meta right now, probably at an all-time low. Sapphire Steel was quite well represented. I did actually want to pull up some of the stats. Sapphire Steel, there was 10 players in the top cut, but 29 players out of 64 on Bucky. It definitely seems like a really good decision statistically to try and solidify that matchup and make sure it's a really clean one. There was only one Ruby Amethyst deck that made the top 16, Jan. So I'm going to show you that list. Here it is. Yeah, it's the same deck. So the 2 best performing Ruby Amethyst decks, I'm going to assume they prep together. I don't know. The 2 best performing Ruby Amethyst decks by a large margin were the exact same list. Very, very interesting. Now, I'm going to show you 2 other Ruby Amethyst decks, which made the top 32, I believe. And these are more like the list we've come to expect.
Versions, yeah. But that is a very impressive result from a prep group to get the 2 best RAs.
Absolutely.
2 with the exact same list.
So this one, top 32, there's on Merlin Krabs, Peter Pan, 1 Tremaine, no Magic Brooms, which breaks my heart. Seems a bit too slow for my taste personally, but seems like a pretty standard list. 3 Peter Pan Shadowfinder is a lot, isn't it? To try and improve your Emerald Steel matchup. I have actually now played Ruby Amethyst from my videos a lot of you have been seeing, and this card does feel very, very lackluster in other situations because it's uninkable.
Yes, and also this hedges a bit for the Mirror with the Crab, where you struggle a bit less against the castles mid to late game.
Yep.
But also
no
0
Bee King
Undisputed.
Yeah, that is wild actually. I only just clocked that. I have to say I don't like this list anywhere near as much. I think with the giant Sisus, I can see the logic of cutting the Bee Kings a fair bit more. But here, I don't know if I can get behind that at all. What do you think about the lack of Bee King in this one?
I don't think I agree with you. I don't think Sisus mean you don't need Bee Kings. I don't see how that would really make sense. But I think it's a similar thought of just having a little bit less uninkables that are that can be very, very awkward in some matchups against them with Steel and Mirror, but then I don't know if it makes sense to play 0 Bee Kings but a Tremaine.
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing, yeah.
Yeah, when Tremaine is kind of like your extra Bee King, because having too many Bee Kings is very awkward. But I don't know if you want Tremaine over the first Bee King.
Yeah, I think also like the Tremaine becomes better when you have more copies of Bee King in a way, because you can use one Bee King to clear like the bad character and then use the Tremaine to get the card you really want. So it's definitely interesting. Let's look at the other top 32 Ruby Amethyst list. This one is on 1 Broom, 3 Flins, 2 Cuzcos, 1 Teeth, 3 Maleficents, 3 Bee King, 2 Medusas, 1 Yzma, no Tremaines, 4 Bee Preps. So a lot of tech cards in this one with like the 1 Teeth and Ambitions, 1 Broom kind of. What do you think about this one? 1 Yzma.
This one is by far my least favorite out of the 4 lists we've seen. And it's not because it won Bee King, it's more of I don't get behind the Teeth and the Yzma, and also only I think you want to max out on the Flins, but
what about the Brooms? Max out on the Brooms, right?
You don't have to. I think playing a few copies of Brooms is fine too, but
So from my perspective, I probably prefer this list from Christopher, if I'm honest, but I also am not a huge fan of it. What I will say, compared with this one, which doesn't have any Bee King, but is still on like the free pans, the crabs, this seems too slow to me. I mean, admittedly, this one is also like, this one looks a bit less focused, a bit less refined. When you look at the tournament winning deck, it is so clean, isn't it? 4 copies of everything, 2 Medusa, 2 Sisu. That is just, they know what they want from the deck. Whereas when I look at this one looks a bit more like they don't know exactly what they want. Would you agree with that statement?
No, I think generally having lesser copies than 4 is often just really valuing the amount of choices that you get in the game with your inking decisions. And I don't think it necessarily means that they don't know what they wanted. It's more like they specifically wanted these counts, but I don't really agree with the counts of the cards here.
Yeah. For me, like my kind of deck building brain, when I look at a list like this looks naturally more refined. And I do think that it's a really interesting discussion to be had over like how many copies of kind of each card and that sort of thing. But for me, like 2 Cuzco, I just don't see what Cuzco's doing for the deck, especially without the crab. I appreciate, obviously, it's giving you some card draw up against Emerald Steel. I don't love this list in the top 32. I don't love this list either, with like the 3 pans. Seems like a lot. It really does. And with no Bee King. By far, I really love the top 2. I am really surprised by the lack of Bee King. I never would have done it myself. But I also really respect the concept. You say that Ruby Amethyst, the Bee Kings are great up against Steel decks, but against Sapphire decks rather, but they're less common. Just hedge your bets for the Bucky matchup in particular. Especially in the 2-game format, you're really rewarded for those 2-0 victories, right? So if you queue into Sapphire Steel, even with those Bee Kings, you're probably going to win going first, and there's a good chance you're going to lose when going second. Not necessarily, but possibly on average, that's where the odds would favour it. Whereas with the Sisu setup against Emerald Steel, you're probably looking favoured for a 2-0 victory.
I don't know if I would go that far, but it definitely improves that matchup, which was a so much more common matchup than Ruby Sapphire, with Ruby Sapphire becoming like less and less popular. Yeah. I think this still really makes sense.
Other thing to consider with these decks as well is that it's closed deck list on day 1, open deck lists on day 2. So do you think that a deck like this from Christopher, for example, with the Teeth and Ambitions, that 1 copy of Teeth and Ambitions could catch an opponent off guard?
Yeah, but it will rarely happen because the card sucks.
Yeah, the problem with Teeth as well is the main thing it's there for is to remove Diablo, but often Diablo is going to be playing cards which can look at your hand and see it coming, right?
Yeah. Also, I think the 8-cost Sisu is the one that in close deck list that will really catch you off guard and punish you.
That was my next question. Yeah,
it's also because in this matchup, in the Ruby Amethyst Mirror, you play 4 followers all the time, and you will just add a follower onto an already decent board if you're not playing to be prep too much. And then if you get punished by Sisu, I think that can really immediately swing the game.
Yeah, that was my next point. I think also the lack of Be King Undisputed in a closed decklist format is also going to catch people off guard because people are still going to be playing around it, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So in the Swiss rounds, when they're up against Sapphire Steel player is not going to feel comfortable just dumping an aerial on an empty board because of the threat of Be King, but Edmund just doesn't even have it. So big shout out to Edmund for winning, and Honsu Ma as well with the top 16. So top 16 is obviously enough for a qualification for the regionals. So as Rapunzel Matt, top 32 is a Rapunzel promo. So good job to all these. Our next second place, who was the top seed, and I have to say, Jan, I think they misplayed pretty heavily in the final game of the tournament. I think they were in a really good winning position. They had the queen down. They went first in the third and final game. They were the first seed from Swiss. Insane record. Top seed from Swiss, winning all your games. Like, that is just a wild record over like 14 rounds of Lorcana. You're looking at very, very few games dropped. But what they had the opportunity to do was sing Whole New World with the queen on turn 2. They didn't. But then on turn 3, they could have dumped the Sleepy's Flute and then sung Whole New World, but they played something different. I can't remember exactly what. And then what ended up happening was a few turns later, they played an aerial, which I think missed and put 2 more Sleepy's Flutes to the bottom of the deck. So there was a Sleepy's Flute in the discard, 2 Sleepy's Flutes at the bottom. They never found the flute, and they just couldn't get to 20 quick enough. Whereas against Ruby Amethyst, those flutes are such a problem to deal with, right? Because they don't have any item removal. So yeah, I do feel like the Steel Amber player had a real opportunity to win the game 3. And I think I would definitely need to watch it back again. But when I watched it live, it seemed like something went a little bit wrong with their decision making.
Yeah, I haven't watched the game, but we cannot blame them for bottom decking with Ariel. That's not on them.
No, that's very true. But it did seem like the opening turn, not to go for the early Whole New World was surprising to me. I have to say I'm far from an Amber Steel songs expert. But anyway, huge performance from Chris. And it's a very interesting setup. I think first and foremost, what I like about this deck is that they've got most of the core cards, which is 4 aerials, 4 Robin Hoods, 4 queens, both shift targets, Rapunzels. But what caught me off guard the most is the Baloo. The Baloo is really fascinating. We've seen Zach Bivens in the previous challenge in America. They had Sleepy's Flutes and Pride Lands as a way for teching for Ruby Sapphire. And I wonder if like the guaranteed lore from Baloo is also just giving you enough in that matchup with the Sleepy's Flutes and the Baloo to get across the line. And we actually saw Chris at one point questing with Baloo and then using Zeus on their own Baloo to get the 2 lore necessary to get the win, which was really cool to see. So in some ways, the card quested for 3 that turn.
Yeah, I assume it will probably help a lot against Ruby Amethyst. Maybe even more so than against Red Blue, where this will just get you over the line together with the flutes.
Yeah, and it was also really interesting to see the Baloo protecting the aerials, for example. Chris was able to sing with aerial and then put Baloo through as a bodyguard, which gave their board a little bit of more protection.
I mean, I guess the one thing I am surprised.
I think I've got the same point. Is it Mr. Smee?
It actually wasn't. But that is also surprising.
Yeah.
It's like I guess the 4 Ursula Singer together with the 4 Zeus is something we haven't really seen yet. Sometimes we saw a few Ursula sprinkled in Amber Steel. And then also only playing 3 Storm Rage on is something that's surprising to me.
Agreed. Yeah, 3 Storm Rage on does seem surprising, but they're also on no copies of Cinderella, which again is also kind of surprising. But the Cinderella in the current meta, I saw like Chris kind of post something on Discord. It does get removed very often because 2 damage is so common in the metagame because of the prevalence of Diablo. Ursula with that 1/4 stat line, she can sing. Obviously, she comes down a turn later, but often you could play Robin Hood or Queen on 1 anyway, and you can sing Zeus with it. It's a little bit more resilient, so you might get a couple of sings out of the Ursula. I think if you're bothering with the Ursula Vanessa, it makes sense to play a lot of copies of Zeus. I think there's some other lists in the top 64 which maybe had like 2 Zeus, 2 Vanessa, and that just doesn't seem like it's going to happen consistently. So I do like that. What do you think about Lawrence over Smee? That was one thing when I looked at the list from before day 2 happened, because they were the top seed. I was surprised that you go for Lawrence over Mr. Smee, especially with Rapunzel and Whole New World in the deck.
I guess there's a few things. One, it's taking up a different turn where we already have 4 flutes for Ursula for turn 2. Maybe we have an extra powerful play for turn 3. And also later in the game, it's just much harder to remove. So it getting to quest once is much more likely because it doesn't get removed by something like a Medusa.
Yep. Yeah, it doesn't get removed by Medusa. Also, that 1 extra strength could be relevant to deal with Queen's Castle, because Queen's Castle can definitely be a bit of a problem for this deck. 3 copies of World's Greatest Criminal Mind with the Queen synergy. If you guys aren't familiar, you can use the Queen to give strength to your opponent's character and then go for the World's Greatest Criminal Mind. 3 copies of Tinkerbell.
Like the best card against Ruby Sapphire to start out the game together with some flutes against the Tamatoa.
Right. Yeah, so it can deal with Tamatoa, Maleficent, Monstrous Dragon. Is there anything else it can remove against Ruby Sapphire?
Sisu. Maui.
Sisu as well. Maui. All sorts. Yeah. Okay, and there was another Amber Steel song player that made it to the top 4. It was actually an Amber Steel Songs mirror. Chris did have the advantage of going first twice in that, and it was a very, very, very fun series. So, yeah, in the top 4, another Amber Steel Songs player, and a very different build. This one from another Chris. This one's on 4 copies of Cinderella, 4 copies of Strength and Storm. That's actually another thing to mention about Christopher K here. No copies of Strength, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute. But this one's got the Golden Harp, which at the end of your turn, if you didn't play a song this turn, banishes character. It can quest for 2. It's on Robin Hood, no Queen. Smee and Piglet are in there, of course. Piglet being a captain can protect Smee. 3 Bare Necessities. Again, Chris, the previous Chris that came second, on no copies of Bare Necessities. This one's on 3 copies of Ursula, 2 Zeus. Also on Lawrence. 1 World's Greatest Criminal Mind. Only 1 Grab Your Swords. 2 Peditas and 2 Cinderella Stout-Hearted. It is a spicy list, isn't it?
This one's very spicy. But 2 Amber Steel in top 4 is also very, very impressive.
Yeah, and actually as well, just to look at the day 2, 8 Amber Steel Songs player made it through to the top cut. Oh, wait, no, is that right? Yeah. No, 7. 7 Amber Steel Songs. And there is an Amber Steel Mufasa player, which we're going to look at a bit later. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so the Perdita was really interesting as well. Perdita is a card I've been a big fan of. And actually, when the card first came out, I tried playing it in songs. One line that I really liked to see with the Perdita was they were able to resurrect the Cinderella to then present the potential shift of Cinderella Stout-Hearted later on in the game. And I think that's something that Perdita could also be utilized in an Amber Ruby deck, for example. You could resurrect the 1-cost Milan to then give yourself a better opportunity to shift Milan, and that's something I'm really interested in trying out. I think it's a card, Perdita, with huge potential, and they ran it very close. They almost did win the mirror matchup despite going second. I love the Smees. I have to say I would never play Steel without Smee, I think. The card is just too efficient for me. I also like the decision to play Bare Necessities. No Sleepy's Flutes either, but has that little bit of extra aggression with the Golden Harp.
Yeah, while in the end, if your opponent manages to stabilize, this might just not get there in the end, but this has much more aggression early mid-game with the efficient quester, Smee, Piglet, add on a Golden Harp a little bit later in the game. It will quest very, very aggressively.
Yeah, and also, like, once you sing A Whole New World, you can then just dump all those aggressive questers down onto a very wide board. That's something we saw Frank Carsten do in Lille very well, as they sang that Whole New World and then got cards like Smee and Piglet down to quest for a lot of points very, very quickly. I mean, one thing that kind of ended up costing Chris in many ways in the semi-final was the fact that they are only on 1 copy of Grab Your Sword and no Tinkerbell. So Chris with a K was just able to develop the board, and Chris with a C couldn't clear it. And obviously because they were going second twice, I do feel like that was a bit of a deciding factor. But they were, I'm not sure what seed they were after day 1, but I'm pretty sure they were quite a high seed as well after day 1. So really, really good performance from this player. Which Amber Steel Songs deck would you play if you could only pick one? Which would you go for? Would you go for the flutes and the Queen and Baloo.
Probably I would go for the flutes, but maybe I would not play as high card counts and try to get some more questing power in there. But like an adjusted version of this is probably what I would want. Also, what's interesting is that usually in something like set 3, the Cinderella Stout-Hearted would be winning the mirror a lot, but now with people attacking with the world's greatest criminal in mind, they're not attacking for the Cinderella, but they're hitting it at the same time. It's not really a win condition you can rely on anymore.
That is very interesting. Okay, so good job to both these players. Congratulations on the Mickey Mouses, and they're going to be at regionals. Now, up next we have 2 decks, one of which made the top 8, and one of which was Zach Bivens, who did unfortunately lose their top 64 match, but they lost in a very tough matchup, which we'll talk a bit about. And it is probably the spiciest deck, certainly the spiciest in the top 8. It was a lot of fun watching this deck in action. It is Amber Emerald. Now, this is a deck which I'm going to have a video coming out on tomorrow. I've actually got some gameplay myself with this deck, and I have a lot of opinions on the lists. And I have to say, we'll look at both lists. They're very, very similar. The biggest difference between the lists is this Mother Knows Best for Jordan here, who did get top 8. They have 3 copies of Mother Knows Best. Note that they have the Keeda 5 cost, but no 1 cost Keeda. Whereas on the other side, the Bivens, is on 2 copies of the 1-drop Keeda, no copies of Mother Knows Best, and a Lucifer. So I think there's only 3 differences. 1 Lucifer for Zach, and 2 Keedas, and for Jordan it's 3 copies of Mother Knows Best. So, what this deck's looking to do, it's looking to develop a board that can sing together 8, and then sing Under the Sea, not banish, but you put all of your opponent's cards onto the bottom of the discard. I tested this deck quite a lot before my first set champs, the content creator one, without Diablo, because I wanted a budget-friendly deck for that event. And what I soon discovered is, even though you don't have Bucky in this deck, Diablo is very, very strong. The main reason for that is that you can being able to sing Bare Necessities when you shift in Diablo is very powerful, because you can discard things like Baboom, which often your opponent's only going to have 1 copy of, potentially. And the other thing is the 1-cost Diablo is suddenly, out of nowhere, you can shift the Diablo in, and then with an aerial, you've suddenly got Sing at 8 out of nowhere, and Under the Sea can come through. A lot of the time, otherwise, in order to get Under the Sea through on turn 4, you would need a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and an aerial. That's also where Sir Hiss comes in. There's a lot of 2-cost songs in this deck. Sudden Chill, Bare Necessities, Painting the Roses Red, and Sir Hiss being an evasive, which can often sing a song and then remain on the board to contribute more towards Under the Sea later, is very powerful. And of course, Prince John is great. You go Sir Hiss on 2, Prince John on 3, and then sing a Sudden Chill or a Bare Necessities of Sir Hiss, and you're starting to draw very, very quickly. And We Don't Talk About Bruno with Ariel and Prince John is delightful. You Have Forgotten Me, big discard. The Cricky's in there probably to deal with locations, Queen's Castle and Hidden Cove in particular. Talk to me about this deck. What do you think, Jan?
It's definitely something I want to explore more. The Sir Hiss is interesting to me because when we've playtested some of the off-meta decks, sometimes there was nothing to keep Flynn in check, so that is also at least 1 2-drop that has more strength than...
Yes, that's a very good point.
Flynn.
Yeah, the Sir Hiss is helping you a little bit against Flynn, that's for sure, because it can get out of hand. And I think we actually did see one of the, possibly Jordan in their top 8 game, Flynn Rider kind of taking the game away from them. I think that's exactly what might have knocked them out, if I'm not mistaken. So the Sir Hiss does give you that. Gives you some extra coverage against Diablo as well. And like I say, I think just having that evasive card on the board which can sing songs multiple times. You don't actually want you don't want to sing, let's say, with an Ursula and then it gets traded out, like the 2-cost Ursula, because then it's your opponent's probably losing a card with 2 strength or less, which you would have been getting rid of with Under the Sea. So the fact that Sir Hiss can sing and remain on the board and also give you some extra Diablo answers is huge, because obviously most of the Diablo decks you're playing against are going to be Emerald Steel. They have access to Babooms, they have access to Strength and Storm, so they can remove your Diablo, whereas you don't really have that many ways of removing your opponent's Diablo. So Hiss is also just giving that little bit of extra coverage about that. There is actually one thing in both of these decks, Jan, which I was surprised by in particular, and it's a card which they're not playing 4 copies of, which I personally would always have played 4 copies of in my list. Any ideas what card that might be?
And there's not that many
There's
where
not
there
that
isn't
many.
a 4 of. I mean, it's either Under the Sea or Painting the Roses Red.
Which one do you reckon?
I would say you're talking about Painting the Roses Red.
Yeah, Painting the Roses Red. I would love to have asked Zach, and I'll probably send him a message actually and ask him, and maybe I'll put it in the comments. Why only 3 copies? I mean, I understand that obviously you want to play other cards, but this card to me just feels like a 4 of. Up to 2 chosen characters get -1 strength this turn, and you draw a card. So it's a song card which increases the odds of your aerial hitting, but obviously it's a song card which replaces itself and has great synergy with the muses. So if your opponent has something like a Diablo in Hidden Cove, you could maybe sing Painting the Roses Red with a Sir Hiss, and then bounce it back with the muses. Hidden Cove is a huge problem for this deck in the mirror matchup. Not in the mirror matchup, possibly mirror, but against Emerald Steel, because suddenly, if you can't remove that Hidden Cove, your Under the Sea is not hitting Diablo, your muses isn't, and Painting the Roses Red gives you a little bit of extra coverage in that. But moreover, it's just a song card which replaces itself, which with the muses is really, really valuable, particularly because of the synergy there. So I personally would have liked to have seen 4 copies of Painting the Roses Red. That's the only thing I don't like about these decks. If I had to pick one, Jordan's or Zach's, I would definitely go for Jordan's with the Mother Knows Best. I was also playing some Mother Knows Best in my setup. Another card I would quite like to have seen, Zach has like this extra bit of discard with the Lucifer, but I do love a bit of Daisy Duck in this deck, which is a 4-cost inkable. I like to call her Daisy Tuck or Friar Duck. She just discards 1 card when you play her. She's a 2/3 stat line for 4 cost, quest for 1. Not the most impressive. Obviously, you'd rather play You Have Forgotten Me most of the time. But yeah. Another thing to mention about You Have Forgotten Me in this deck, Jan, is it's an action card, so you can discard it to shift in Diablo, which is pretty spicy as well. So yeah, ultimately Zach did become unstuck in their top 64 game against Emerald Steel. But funnily enough, I think the next deck we're looking at is this Emerald Steel deck. It is the player, I do believe, that finished 4th. It's certainly a very similar list, because I know that the player that Zach lost to had 4 copies of Hidden Cove. Which is probably, like, Zach probably looked at the list, like, when I've played this Amber Emerald deck, Hidden Cove's my worst nightmare. My kind of point was with this deck, if I'm not beating Emerald Steel, why am I playing this deck? And the Hidden Cove can cause it some problems. And that was ultimately what Zach became unstuck against. So we're going to take a quick look at the Emerald Steel decks, because I don't find them that interesting. But 4 Hidden Coves and 4 Donald Duck Perfect Gentlemen is very interesting. This is a different build. 4 Babooms. This is not the kind of typical build we would see. No copies of Grab Your Sword in here. They're still playing the Jafar Dreadnought despite playing the Donald Duck. They only have 1 copy of the Small Robin Hood. I honestly like this list a lot.
I don't think I do. It's I don't know. I don't know if you want to be going to 6 ink to play the 4 Tinkerbells, and I do think
4 Tink is something I hadn't clocked yet.
A higher copy of 3-cost Ursula and Sudden Shits can be really important to get your opponent into the top deck mode a little quicker, to get rid of the Flava Charms out of Sapphire hands. That being said, I think this deck has very good top decks, which is very good in the Emerald Steel mirror, and also Donald Duck text for that. So I think in a heavy Emerald Steel field, this will pair very well.
I really like the idea of dropping the Robin Hood 1-drops and playing Hidden Coves, because a lot of the time on turn 3, you could just play. They've gone higher on the Aladdin count, right? You could play Aladdin, Diablo, Ursula. Do you really want to be shifting Robin Hood on turn 3 with this deck? I mean, obviously it's a nice option to have.
Yeah, you only really want to do it if you can't do the Diablo stuff, and then you're like, oh, okay, I guess the next best thing is Robin Hood Bucky.
Yeah.
Shift Robin Hood if you're not doing Diablo stuff.
And the Hidden Coves do give you a lot of coverage against Ruby decks that are relying perhaps on Brawl to remove your Diablo nice and early. So I love the idea of being heavy on the Hidden Cove. I'm not sure I like only 2 copies of Ursula Deceiver of All, but I can also see why they've gone for it. What I do like is 4 copies of Baboom. I love Baboom. It's an action card which can't be discarded in the mirrors by Ursula Deceiver, but it can still be something you discard with your Diablo to shift it. You can use it to remove your opponent's Diablo. It's a very interesting list, which I don't say often about Emerald Steel decks. Often Emerald Steel, I'm like, yeah, okay, it's an Emerald Steel deck. But this one, there's actually quite a lot of cool stuff going on here. We'll look at some of the others, because there was, I think, 3 in the top 8. This one is on Pegasus 1-drop, Robin Hood 1-drop, 4 copies of both Shifters, 2 Sudden Chills, 3 Ursula Deceiver of Fools, 2 Zeus. One. What's that?
This one will be my least favorite one.
What don't you like about it?
The biggest thing is the Pegasus, which I really don't like, and then I don't really think you need to play. So with this list, we're playing 4 Diablo 1, 4 Pegasus 1, 4 Robin Hood 1 for the shift lines, and I think by playing 3 different shift lines, you don't get a lot of value out of these shift lines because mulliganing for something like a Pegasus shift or a Robin Hood shift will inevitably lower the chance of you actually having the Diablo shift, and I think just not playing those cards and mulliganing more aggressively for Diablo shift will win you more games in the long run.
Yeah, I can see it. I don't like the lack of Hidden Cove. I do like Pegasus. I have to say, I haven't. Bear in mind, I don't think I've ever played this deck. Like, I actually think I've not got a single game with this deck played. Obviously, I've watched it a lot. What I don't like is I don't like the Zeus. I feel like Zeus is going to be, and the swords, even though they seem like they might be good in the mirror to answer beasts and whatnot, I feel like it's just going to cost you more than it's going to help you. It's going to get discarded a lot.
Yeah, but in the mirror, it's actually like okay, but the problem is it doesn't really follow the deck's game plan at all. So in other matchups, I think this will hurt you a lot to have uninkable removal in your hand instead of something that will keep pushing your like proactive game plan.
This one's also got a real lack of the 4-drop Floodborns, but obviously it does have a lot more shift lines with the Robin Hood and Pegasus, both being shift options that could come through maybe on turn 4 as a Floodborn.
Wait, this doesn't have any. Wait, two Donald Ducks, but no Jafars, no Flints.
Yeah, I have to say I definitely prefer the first list we looked at significantly. We've got, I think, one more Emerald Steel deck to look at, which also made the top 8. This one by Eric D'Souza. 2 Hidden Coves, 4 Robin Hoods, 3 Southern Chills, 3 Aladdin, 4 Ursula Deceiver, 2 Flynn Rider, which we didn't actually see in the other list, 4 Jafar Dreadnought, 4 Brunos, and 2 Crickies.
Finally, some Flints, but I'm not sure I really like the Quickies, but I am a big fan of a few copies of Flint to actually close out the game a bit quicker once you have discarded your opponent's hand down.
I have to say I quite like the 4 copies of Ursula Deceiver of All with a few Sudden Chills in there as well. Max copies of Storm Rage on Strength. Crickie's a great card, but when you're playing Bucky, to play a card at this cost, which isn't a Floodborn, I'm not sure it's quite good enough for my taste there, but it is going to help you against Queen's Castle, and there's no Zeus in this deck, which I definitely wouldn't play Zeus personally in this one, so I can see why they've gone for it, maybe for some extra coverage against locations.
Yeah, so I guess, so basically the deck doesn't really remove locations, but I don't think that necessarily means it's weak to locations, because often it can literally ignore locations and be completely fine with that. I don't think it needs to answer locations. I don't think Ruby Amethyst can play Queen's Castle out a lot because they need to keep all their ink in hand so that they get to Medusa and Deep Prep. So I don't really think we need to answer locations.
Which is your favorite of the 3?
Can I see the first one again?
4 Donald, 3 Jafar, only 1-drop, 1 Robin Hood.
Probably this one. Maybe it's not. I mean, this one, of course, every list is better against some stuff and worse against some other stuff. But I think this one, with how much Emerald Steel was represented in Top Cut and how much it was played at the entire event, I think I have to go for this one.
I like this one too. I would maybe have liked to have seen a few more Ursulas. It's also just come to mind, and you made the point about not maybe wanting to go to 6 ink for Tinkerbell, but they do play 4 copies of Donald Duck. With that extra card draw, maybe you can afford to get the Tink out, right?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I actually really like the look of this list. I love the idea of 4 Coves. I love Baboons. I like that they're playing 4 Aladdins and lots of the cheaper Floodborns and not worrying about the shift so much. I think this looks like a really interesting setup. All right, next we've got Sapphire Steel. Sapphire Steel had 10 decks in the top cut, so it was the second most represented. And this one finished in the top 8. So this also secured a Mickey Mouse. Playing Whole New World. Playing 3 copies of Argus, which is good against Queen's Castle and also can disrupt the Flynn Rider, even if they've got a Fox down.
It doesn't just disrupt the Flynn Rider, it's also suddenly their Sisu can't easily quest multiple times because for willpower so much. So it's like both Flynn, Castle, but also the Sisu that it so it's like really great in that matchup.
2 Babooms, no Fire the Cannons, only 3 Mickeys, which I was a bit critical of when I saw the list. Now, the argument for 3 Mickeys is very strong. If you find the Mickey or the Fishbone Quill, you don't want any more in your deck, right? But then, of course, the downside of playing 3 when you could play 4 is you're going to find that turn 3 curve less often. So it's making your deck less consistent, but also, in theory, making it better when you do hit the ramp.
Yeah, so, but in recent sets, often you would always prefer Quill, but now against Emerald Steel, for example, Mickey is often your preferred ramp unless you want to go turn 4 Tinkerbell. Yep. So that's probably the matchup where it would kind of hurt. In the other matchups, you're completely fine with just 4 Quill, 3 Mickey.
2 Titans, 1 Zeus, 2 Bell for Flaversham, 2 Beast Tragic Hero. Sometimes in this slot we might see Beast Hard-Headed, maybe Audrey Ramirez is what I'm trying to ship recently. 3 Grab Your Swords, 3 Let It Goes, 2 Gaston instead of any copies of Ariel, and 4 Tinks, 4 Tamatoa. Gaston's an interesting pick as well. Gaston's a great card.
Yeah. So I think the Beast Tragic Hero right now is much better than Hard-Headed just because you kind of want to be taking for IA more, and even if they have Medusa, it just comes down on your turn 4, so it dodges Medusa for 1 or 2 turns, depending on if you're on the play or not. And then Gaston's, I think a lot of these lists already take into account that Ruby Sapphire is a bit less common, right? Because we saw no Flints or no Sudden Shields in some lists from Emerald Steel. Now we see Gaston over Ariel. And in a lot of like these mid-rangier matchups, the card might be much better than being able to quest for 5 and having Ward. Because even a 4/4, most decks don't just remove a 4/4, it doesn't need Ward. So I do think it's interesting how these decks are adjusted for this shifting metagame.
We also saw, I believe it was Stephen, we saw in the Sapphire Steel mirror matchup earlier on in the tournament. If not, it was certainly someone with a very similar list with these 2 Beast Tragic Heroes, and they played against someone that in this slot had Beast Hard-Headed, which is obviously better for the mirror. But ultimately, the most important thing in the mirror, who goes first? So teching for the mirror matchup with a Beast Hard-Headed, probably not going to be that wise.
Yeah, the Beast Hard-Headed, while it helps in the mirror, it's more important for Ruby Sapphire to really disrupt the Quill, then you force them in your whole new world Quill matchup plan. But in the mirror, while it's good, there's more important things.
Okay, we've got a few more Sapphire Steel decks to look at. This one was top 16. 3 Fire the Cannons, no Babooms, 4 Mickeys, 3 Titans, 3 Beast Tragic Hero, 2 Let It Goes, only 3 Tamatoas. That's the only thing I don't like about this one. I think you always play 4 Tamatoas.
I think 3 is fine. It's just, it's not that easy to get it out non-isolated against Ruby Amethyst. And it is very expensive. And if you're in any of the whole new world lines, then often there's much better things you can do for 8 ink, considering that you're going to whole new world in a few turns again. So I really don't hate the 3 Tamatoa. The biggest thing about this list I want to point out is the 3 Fire the Cannons, right? The biggest upside is on top of removing something, maybe you can fit in a 1-cost item on the same turn, but also you can Quill and then Fire the Cannons on the same turn.
Yeah, that is a huge play, right? A lot of the time, if you're answering a Diablo, you have to kind of take a turn off from your game plan. Whereas with this deck, you can go Fishbone Quill on 3, Ink, and then use that Fire the Cannon. So you're ramping and removing Diablo in the same turn, which is a huge swing moment.
Yep. The only issue, I guess, with it is that I see the issue with it in the very first game when you don't know the matchup that you're playing. Where Baboom is something you could often keep as your best ink in terms. You can, if you see you're playing against Emerald Steel, or maybe you need to, sometimes you would rather contest a Flynn, but maybe you don't have a 2-drop and then you would just Baboom their Flynn, depending on the matchup. And then in other matchups where you know Baboom is a bad card, you can just ink it. You don't have that luxury with Fire the Cannons to ever keep it blind, I think. So because you won't be keeping it blind, if you're playing against Emerald Steel, maybe you're a little bit less likely to have a Diablo answer in the opening hand.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So we've got one more Sapphire Steel deck to look at, which is also top 16. This one on 2 Fire the Cannons, 1 Baboom, 2 Rise of the Titans. The previous list was on 3. This one's on 1 Let It Go, 3 Aerials, 2 Hades sneaking in there, as well as 2 Simba Fighting Prince. This Simba is when you play this character, and whenever he banishes another character in a challenge during your turn, you can either draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards, or deal 2 damage. What do you think about the Simba and the Hades? This is kind of closer to what Alphos was playing.
Yeah, so this is a no Holy World list, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I only just clocked that. Okay, that's a good... yeah, that's pretty important.
I think if this was a Holy World list, we wouldn't... There's no way we would see 3 Ariel, 2 Hades, 3 Simba, 4 Tamatoa. That doesn't really work like that.
What's your opinion overall on Whole New World versus no Whole New World? Personally, I'm in the Whole New World camp.
I think if Ruby Amethyst wasn't so popular, no Whole New World would be fine. I think with how popular it is, I would probably prefer to be on a Whole New World list.
What is it that Whole New World's doing against Ruby Amethyst?
It just lets you really force your game plan of ramping, hyper ramping with Krill, and then not giving them time because you get your game plan through a bit quicker. And if Ruby Amethyst has time, they're very good at drawing lots of cards, at outvaluing you because they draw into their B preps, B kings to remove your stuff, and then they have inevitable lore gain with goats. And with the Whole New World, especially going first, you can just force this game plan of yours where you take their time away by just being really aggressive yourself. So I think that's the biggest reason why I like Whole New World still, but other than that, the margins are still close, and even in the same matchups, when going second, I think in some matchups, no Whole New World's better, and then when going first, sometimes the Whole New World list would be better.
The other thing I like about Whole New World against Ruby Amethyst is it helps you dig for Rise of the Titans a little bit more to answer Queen's Castle. Rise of the Titans is a card which you're going to hold it in your hand sometimes, but then often you're just going to, I wish I just had a Rise. And you want a Whole New World that turn anyway, and then bam, you find your Rise as well. Rise of the Titans in a deck without a Whole New World, for example, like I would just be so worried about top decking this at the wrong moment and not having an abundance of card draw. The other advantage of having a Whole New World, obviously in this tournament, day 1 is closed deck lists, where if you're playing this deck with no Whole New World, your opponent isn't going to know for a very long time, really, that you're not playing Whole New World, and they kind of have to respect that it is. Whereas in those closed lists, then the Ruby Amethyst players are maybe going to be able to take that game plan you mentioned, where they can be very aggressive with their card draw and not worry about being punished. I just feel like with the Whole New World, the fact that you've got Fishbone Quill, you can just get rid of the Whole New World if you don't want to play it. The deck is still going to function a lot of the time. It's not like if you have Whole New World, you have to play it, right? You still have the option of getting rid of it. Yeah. And then you're in control of that state of the game in terms of cards in hand.
I've heard that argument a lot, but I think the biggest issue with that argument is just that your deck, if you're playing a deck with Whole New Worlds, it's built so different, where if in a deck with Whole New World, you're playing lots of lower impact cards. Maybe you even play only 3 Tamatoa, no other top end, like Simbas or Hades.
Yep.
So then, if on top of that you quill the Whole New World, you might just not run enough value heavy cards. And then in a deck that doesn't play Whole New World to begin with, you're not forced to ink a card, because instead maybe you get a card of higher value, and then also you just have a list that has much higher value top decks. So you will be better at a game where you don't want to play Whole New World still.
And is that maybe where this Gaston comes in then from Steven, who got top 8? They've got the Whole New World, and then if they get rid of the Whole New World with the Quill, they can fall back on a Gaston to replenish the hand a little bit. Is that maybe the reasoning you think they've gone for that?
Yeah, I think it's just in general a very good card, unless you really need an Ariel to raise a Ruby Sapphire. I really think Gaston's completely fine. And even with Whole New World, it's kind of good to just go turn 4 Gaston while quilling everything away. Then even the card you get extra, you might just play it out before you sing Whole New World on your turn 5. But it also helps for if you're in a game without Whole New World, for sure.
All right, the one I've been looking forward to most. We've got the spicy decks at the end, but up next we've got Ruby Sapphire, which is a deck that you are quite a big fan of, Jan. This was a top 16 deck. We're also going to look at another one which was top 32. So top 16, this was a game on stream where this deck did lose 2-0 to Ruby Amethyst. So I'll talk through some of the most interesting things. I think that instantly is going to catch a lot of people's eyes. It's only 2 copies of Maui, but 2 copies of Hercules, which would be unheard of just a month or 2 ago. 1 Vitalisphere. The Hercules and the Vitalisphere are very much aimed at helping deal with Queen's Castle. There's 2 copies of Pegasus Flying Steed, the Ruby version of Sir Hiss. There's a Great Stone Dragon, 3 Halfarolgos, 3 B-Preps, 3 Sisu, no ice blocks, develop your brains. What do you think, Jan? What's going on with this deck?
It's similar to what I would play. I've been talking a lot with Sailor about how to adjust red-blue for how the meta has been shifting. I think this deck is 3 cards different to the list that I played in the two last set champs that I played.
I bet you were playing 4 copies of Halfarolgo.
Yes, I would never not do that. So there's not.
I knew it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I like about the deck. I think Pegasus is a while I absolutely despise having to play it, because it's the use case where Pegasus is good is usually very, very specific, because even on the play your preferred line would be even against Ruby Amethyst, on the play your preferred play line would still be 1 jump into Tala, not anything that has to do with Pegasus. But if you don't have that, maybe sometimes you still go for the Pegasus on the play.
Right, so that's to stop the Flynn Rider just getting out of hand.
But where it really shines is on the draw, because on the draw, if they go Flynn Sisu and you go 1 jump into anything, or it usually has to be ball, because otherwise they're getting the 3 Lord twice. So especially going second, Pegasus into Quill into Medusa is really what you're looking for. And if you're not playing any Pegasus, the games on the draw can be tough to win against Flynn Sisu. So even if it's like an awful top deck, doesn't do what the deck wants to do, it kind of wants to ramp onto not play it. In most matchups, you will ink it all the time. I'm kind of getting around to the idea of Pegasus. I don't like the Stone Dragon. I would always play for a Fargo.
Yeah, I don't like the Stone Dragon particularly either.
I think Sisu and Ice Block are falling a bit out of favor because they're actually not great against Ruby Amethyst, and against Emerald Steel, B-Prep is the better board clear. So it is nice to have, especially against these like more off-meta green deck. The Sisu can really swing the board where B-Prep would reset it, they redevelop, so that's still kind of good. I think 2 Hercules, 2 Mari is completely fine. Maybe something like 2 Hercules, 3 Mari would also work. It makes it so in the Ruby Amethyst mirror, they really are tiptoeing with their castles, because even on an empty board state, if they play castle, you play Hercules, you could say, okay, it's a 1-for-1, but you still have this Hercules on the board that's really annoying. Any extra body protects you from B-King, is a potential Fargo singer. So Hercules is great, and I do think you don't need 4 Mari with the 2 copies of Hercules. I think something like 2 Vitalisphere also really helps the Ruby Amethyst mirror.
Yeah, so Vitalisphere, I remember you mentioning a line to me with the Tamatoa. You could pull back the Vitalisphere with Tamatoa, replay it, give it 2 extra strength, and rush and take out a castle with a Tamatoa. That sounds really good.
Yeah, it is great, and I think you always want at least 1 Vitalisphere in current meta. I think it is actually so good that you could easily up that count. It's because it's not as niche as you think. Even just playing a Maleficent or Tamatoa or anything and taking any value trade against any deck on top of that can be decent enough for how good an inkable item is in a deck with Lava Shaman Tamatoa.
Would you ever play 3?
Yeah, you could definitely play 3. I'm currently on 2, but 3 is also fine.
Would you ever play 4?
No.
Okay.
Too much. The Great Stone Dragon is something I'm still not convinced of. That's seeing more and more play. People say it's okay, or it kind of helps against Emerald Steel. But I think it's too slow for that. And Aladdin is already a good card for them, especially if you miss on your 1 jump, because then if they play it, you can't really do much on your turn 3 because they don't give you a ball target, and Quill isn't good in the matchup. So I think Great Stone Dragon in that matchup, while sometimes it's good, it's usually still awkward. But if you manage to stabilize against either Ruby Amethyst or in the Ruby Sapphire Mirror, then if the game turns into a longer game, the Great Stone Dragon can really gain a lot of value. For me, I think the amount of games where you have to ink it because it would be so almost useless is like a little too high still.
I'm unconvinced by the Stone Dragon. Is there ever an argument for Tremaine in a deck like this?
No. I mean, there's an argument, but we're not in a meta where we need to tech for Ruby Sapphire, and it would just be So we actually have so little fear of the Sapphire matchups that we are playing 3 Maleficent Dragons, so there's no way we're adding an extra uninkable intro main.
Okay, the next one. I think this is the one I actually mentioned before. Where's the Dig a Little Deeper deck? What's going on?
I want to see the deck a little deeper.
This is not the right list. Is it? It's not right.
It's a different list. It's the third list, the top 16 list.
There we go. Okay, that's why I got confused. Okay, so this was the deck that was actually on stream in the top 16. I managed to miss this one, and this was they lost 2-0 to Ruby Amethyst. They have Dig a Little Deeper in the mix. Sing Together 8. Look at the top 7 cards of your deck. Put 2 into your hand and the rest on the bottom. There's 2 Vitalospheres, Queen of Hearts, only 3 Fishbone, which seems a bit outrageous. A Great Stone Dragon, a Judy Hops in the mixer, 1 Hercules, 3 Maui, 4 Tamatoa, 3 Maleficent. The Queen of Hearts, Jan. I'm vibing with the Queen of Hearts. I like it. I like it a lot.
I think this list is the most interesting list that I've seen all tournament. This guy's been going off about.
So far, we've got the spice at the end.
Yeah,
we've got Amber Steel Mufasa still to come, mate.
Yeah, I guess we'll look at those, but I'm not excited. So this guy's been going off about how his list's perfect and everything, and I don't think it's that, but it does have a few very, very cool and I think good ideas on how to build this deck. First of all, it didn't cut any of the Tadas how far ago Medusa, so that already makes me happy.
It did cut a Fishbone Quill though.
Yes.
Yeah, how do you feel about that?
I don't think it's good, but it's not the end of the world.
If you swap this Great Stone Dragon for a Fishbone Quill, I'm liking it a lot more, I have to say.
Yeah, that's the first step, and I really don't like the Judy Hops. I think the rest is actually fine. So the Queen of Hearts is interesting, and their argument for it, as far as I understand, is basically it's the same against a Flynn. If it's just for keeping a Flynn in check, it does the very same. It's a body that you play. Flynn doesn't gain 3 lore. If they play Sisu, it gains 3 lore again, but that's the case with Pegasus too. And then after that, you just keep it around for B King fodder.
Yep.
But unlike Pegasus, this can actually help you take out maybe
Merfolk hyper aggro.
Yes, against the aggressive deck, maybe they quest it. Maybe they're playing brooms, they don't see it coming, they're on play, they quest with a broom, you clear it for free, that would punish them a lot.
Yep.
But also, this helps you take out a castle together with a Maui, for example. So it has some other utility that Pegasus doesn't have. In the case where you do play your 2-drop to check the Flynn, the upside of Pegasus is also it can quest a few times, and also it can sing 1-jump without being able to be challenged. Those are the upsides for Pegasus, but I do think it's not as clear as Pegasus is just better than Queen of Hearts, and I think they have some valid points for why Queen of Hearts might be better. So that I really like. I think the core idea of the list is really good. I think very much notable is they play 4 B preps and no Sisu or Ice Blocks at all. And they're basically saying Sisu's not good against Emerald Steel or Ruby Amethyst, while sometimes if they maybe play into it against Ruby Amethyst, it can be good. It's a 3-quester that you can dime, that can be okay. But I do think that generally that is a pretty fair assessment, and B-Prep's just the removal that comes down early and clears everything regardless. So it doesn't give you this immediate swing, but they're just saying, okay, I'll swing the board with my 2-for-1 characters afterwards. And the most interesting card is, of course, the Dig a Little Deeper.
Do you like it?
I definitely want to test it. I think I think I might like it. It's not that difficult to sing together 8. It's if you let a Pegasus or Queen of Hearts stick, that plus a Medusa can already sing Dig a Little Deeper.
Yeah.
And that, or a Tala plus any of your 5
Maui, for example, would be a great sing together, or a Hercules.
And so this does multiple things. It doesn't just it doesn't just give you card advantage out of singing, which is already very good because Ruby Amethyst, they don't always rush you down. Sometimes they will let you die the slow death, or with prioritizing their card draw and winning the long game. And something like Dig a Little Deeper can very much help combat that. And on top of that, it also lets you find the tools that you will need in your specific games. Maybe you need a B prep to clear the board. Maybe you need Tamatoa to push your own game plan. Maybe you're missing the dime. So I do think Dig a Little Deeper. I don't think you want to play. You definitely don't want to play more than 2 copies. I don't even think you want to play 2 necessarily. But as a one-off, I think it does have a lot of potential.
Yeah. I like the list a lot as well. I do think, for me, the thing I don't like is the Great Stone Dragon. I would just play a 4 Fishbone Quill. But I really like the Queen of Hearts. I mean, I said to you in the past, I think, before Bockham, that I thought like the 3-drop uninkable Sisu, even though it's uninkable, if you're playing ice blocks, like just that little bit of extra coverage against early aggressive decks, and Queen of Hearts gives you that, right? If you queue into little 8-year-old Lisa in round 1 with a 99 puppy deck, you're going to be very happy that you've got a Queen of Hearts in your deck to just help you get out of jail in that one. And yeah, it does seem like it's got a lot of utility later on as well, just being able to even Vitalosphere a Queen of Hearts to deal 4 damage to a castle. That 4 damage might be all you need to remove it in a lot of situations, for example. I can definitely see the logic. Judy Hopps is definitely one that's going to help you in Sapphire Mirrors. I guess the question is how common a Sapphire Mirror is going to be.
And doesn't even help that much because
they have Tamatoa, right?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not just that. I think the biggest problem with Judy and Ruby Sapphire is that so often you will not be able to keep a lot of cards in your hand. You will ink almost everything except something like a Flower Charm Tamatoa that will provide the value again. So even if you know you're in the matchup, I think very often you will not. If you draw Judy not exactly when you need it,
you
will often have to ink it before it can become a good card.
Do you think this Judy should instead be maybe a 4th dragon or something else?
4th dragon's fine. I think 2 Hercules is something you can do.
All right, well, let's move on. We've got one more Ruby Sapphire deck. This one does have. This was a top 32. Also, 1 Queen of Hearts, 2 ice blocks. Has 3 copies of the Inkable Sisu and 3 copies of the Shift Sisu. 1 Hercules, 3 dragons. We're not going to spend too long on this one. Do you think this is also a valid way to go, or do you think the ice blocks are just out?
I mean, they're good in a different way, and actually, like they're not bad cards at all. It's just the uninkable count can be hard to swallow if you include both ice blocks and Sisu. The biggest thing I just would dislike about this deck would be the 3-cost Sisu. I think I can kind of get behind playing 2 drops to offset the Flint for a turn, but the opportunity cost of playing a 3-drop in this deck is extremely, extremely high, even higher than not playing a 1-jump on 2.
Right, because you want to play 1 jump. You even want to play 1 jump on turn 2 into turn 3 or 4-drop, or on 3 you want to play Fishbone.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes.
So even none of those situations you would want to play the Sisu, ideally, and you got 3 copies of it. But obviously it's a nice shift target potentially. But yeah. All right, we're going to move on to the last 3 decks, the most spicy of all. Up first, we've got, in fact, no, we're going to do this one first. Sorry, baited. We're going to go Hyper Aggro. There was 1 Hyper Aggro deck that made the top cut. I did lose the top 64. I think it was the lowest seed, which can't have helped. Imagine this was top seed. That would be quite scary, wouldn't it? My goodness. Going first every game. 2 Befuddles, Churdabogs, Lilo, Broom, Maleficent, Pascal, 4 copies of each. I love that start. This is exactly how the color combo I would go for Hyper Aggro. I think Emeralds may be an argument, but I think this will be my go-to. Then 4 copies of Snake, Piglet, Simba at 2. Only 2 copies of Pinocchio. I also love. 2 copies of Arthur, 4 Baloos, 4 Donald Ducks, 4 Mims. I like. The end is where I don't like so much. I like the 4 Goats. I'm not convinced Castle or Pongo should be in the deck though. So Castle is obviously a great card. Very, very good at gaining lore. The thing is, in a Hyper Aggro deck, Castle is very much not guaranteed any lore, and what you really want is guaranteed lore. Or you just want something that your opponent, like ready character which can be removed. And I don't think Castle therefore should be in the deck. And the Pongo, I've never liked Pongo. A card I do like, do you know what card I'm going to say? You don't. It's similar to Pongo. But it costs 4, it's uninkable.
Lucky.
What did you say?
Lucky?
Yeah, lucky. Could work, right? So Lucky has 2 abilities. One of them is like if you have 4 characters that quested or something. Like if you have 4 characters on the board, they all quest for an extra if you exert this. So like basically quest for 3 or 4. But then the other ability is you can exert it and look at like the top 3 or I think 3 cards and put any character which costs 2 or less into your hand. That could be pretty good. But
maybe
the Pongo for me, I mean, the Pongo I don't hate. To be fair, the Pongo can quest and get its ability through. So the Pongo's fine. It's mainly the Queen's Castle I think is out of place. But I honestly love the look of the rest of the list. And I think Hyper Aggro is probably really good. I think it's just a deck that a lot of very strong players want to avoid because you have less agency with your choices. Because a lot of the time it's really about how your opponent deals with your deck rather than the choices you make. Because the games are over very quick, it's a deck that a lot of top players will want to avoid because you just don't have as much agency in a game which is 6 turns compared with a game which is 20 turns, right?
Also, I think I assume it will still, at least if Emerald Steel knows that they're up against this, they can just go for like Singing Storm Chance and really go into the matchup. Just for the castle, but I think in any matchup your opponent plays for board, you're losing the board already because you're playing understated character, and then the castle is not great. But I do think if you're not playing castle in this, I think Ruby Sapphire could be fine against this because against Ruby Sapphire they will just ramp to a board clear and then maybe they can stabilize. Where if they do that against a deck with castle, you play castle before they play the B prep, and then they B prep, you still have the castle, and you win the game from there.
Right.
So I think for that matchup it's still good, but maybe in the other matchups it
You
doesn't
say that
really
Ruby
shine.
Sapphire is going to be fine against this, but then your opponent goes triple Lilo by turn 2 Shimmering Line. Queen of Hearts would help you out in that case, though, wouldn't it? That's for sure.
It definitely would.
But yeah, I'm really big shout out to Trey Baloo who got to top 64 of Hyper Aggro. I think Hyper Aggro has got to be underrated. I think I rate it. I really like the list a lot. I really do. Being hypercritical, I can see the Pongo in the castle. I just feel like there might be better options there. All right, up next we have we got 2 Mufasa decks. This one got top 32. The next Mufasa deck is an Amber Steel deck. What? This one got top 32. It actually lost to the Sing Together deck, which got top 8. So that was a bit of an unfortunate end to Mufasa. It's got 4 Mulans, 4 Plutos. One line to look out for with these Mufasa decks is Gaston on turn 3. And actually, Nick can do it on turn 2, in fact, with the Pluto. But let's just say Gaston on 3. You then, on turn 4, exert Gaston to pay 2 less. You play Mother Gothel for 0. And then you instantly Rapunzel it. Triple card draw! A huge problem this deck has against Emerald Steel is that they just shut down your Mother Gothel every time and you never get Rapunzel value. But with the Gaston approach, suddenly against Emerald Steel, you have a way of getting card draw.
Yep.
And if you've got card draw, you can keep inking and then maybe you can get to Sisu and clear the Buckies. Do you think this deck's any good?
No. Also, if they play Diablo, then you can draw cards, but it won't be much fun.
Diablo does sound like a bit of a problem for this deck.
Yeah,
there is the option of Pegasus 2 drop in this deck. Is that ever of interest? It's probably not helping you against Diablo, is it? Because it's getting removed.
Yeah. Any evasive that just tries to contest it, that dies.
So Brawl? Probably 4 copies of Brawl. Even though you play Mufasa, I think you've got to play the Brawl still, right? We saw in Bochum someone do very well with Mufasa. There was actually, I think, 2 or 3 players in the top 64 of Mufasa. But they had like 10 songs. They had a B prepared in there. They had like 4 Brawls. Some other stuff. Some B Kings, I think. I think Brawl's got to be in the deck, right?
I don't know.
Like, even though you're a Mufasa deck...
I know much about this.
Yeah. Even though you're a Mufasa deck, at some point, you can't build that heavily into Mufasa because you need cards like Brawl, I think, in the current meta.
I mean, it's definitely the case where if there's a card that's so important, like, you have to just bear with the risk. You don't have to play full characters.
Yeah.
I guess the Gaston into Stitch can also be very, very strong to get the card draw going to the...
So you go Gaston on 3, and then on turn 4...
On turn 5 you play the
so you can get Stitch through on 5, yeah. 2 Churnabogs instead of 1. Very, very interesting. Big shout out to Nick Davies. I do think that maybe Brawl would be wise. I'd love to see Perdita and the Shift Milan, man. I want to see the Shift Milan pop off. That's how I would build it, I think. I think I would go way less heavy on the really expensive Mufasa Dream and just have more like 6. Probably how I'd go. I think Perdita, Milan Shift with Milan Injured Soldier. That's a combo I want to explore. But shout out to Nick. Oh my goodness. What is this? It is Mufasa with Amber. And there's songs. And there's Tiana. Your face.
What?
There's a queen with no queen shift. Like,
Nani?
I've asked, I literally asked in Discord, I was like, guys, can someone confirm for me that this is actually correct? Yeah, okay, they weren't on this. They were on Emerald Steel with Prince John's.
Oh.
I don't know, though. This just doesn't look like a real deck, does it?
No, look at the Nani.
One sec, I've lost the camera.
Cards.
Yeah. Yeah, look at the Nani and look at the Queen 1-drop with no Queen 5-drop. This is not a real deck. I'm sorry to disappoint, guys. Apparently they were on Emerald Steel with Prince John. That makes more sense, doesn't it?
I actually think Prince John is a good development.
Agreed. I would play Prince John every time.
I think Ruby Amethyst players are kind of coping that the matchup's fine, and then if you add Prince John, it's... I think even before you add it, it's not fine for them, but then it's definitely not fine for Ruby Amethyst. It's there.
All right, Jan, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me. Where can people find you if they want to see more of your stuff? When are you making your own channel? Where's that?
I have an own channel. It's like 1 or 2 videos.
Yeah, a One Piece video.
Yeah, but I could do... I don't know. So it's... you can find our weekly podcast on Fridays on Podcana, on all podcast platforms, and you can find what I'm up to usually on my Twitter recently, which is Moyen_Jess.
All right, Jan, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much. See you soon. Bye, everyone.